Hello and welcome to the Bookcast Club, a podcast of people who love to chat books. I'm Belle. I'm coming to you today from Naarm, Melbourne in Australia, and I'm joined by the beautiful friend of the pod, Pauline, who's also coming to us from Melbourne. Hi, Pauline.
Hello, it's nice to be here. Thank you so much for asking me to jump on. And I love that we found each other through Instagram, Bookstagram, on my post on all my favorite bookish pods. So it's a full circle moment, I think.
Absolutely. I was so excited when I got your message back because initially I'd messaged Pauline, I feel like it was middle of the year when we were doing a planning session. And I was like, well, it'd be really cool
Yeah,
to get Pauline
yeah,
on because I'd followed you for, I think, just a couple of months and I really liked your content. I should mention that Pauline, is a bookstagrammer. She has a book and reading focused Instagram account. Do you want to drop your handle for us, Pauline?
yes, it's very simple. It's just at paulineisreading.
Pauline does such beautiful book posts, sort of like monthly. I mean, I guess you can probably talk about what you do, but you do that beautiful monthly recaps, what's coming out.
It's a bit of a mixed bag. So yeah, so Bookstagram, it's been a little while now. So I was just thinking about this. I started back in lockdown 2020. Obviously, a lot of people were locked down, especially here in people picked up reading, which I mean, reading has always been my thing, but I just didn't really have a proper outlet for it. So yeah, it's been just over 5 years, and then I started off, which format wise, I've pretty much kept it the same, really, all the way through. I haven't really evolved to book talk or anything like that. I've kept it as per how I've always enjoyed posting and doing it, which is mainly a reviewing platform. In saying that, I'm not obviously a professional reviewer, so it's just me posting my thoughts really, and then yeah, I do monthly wrap ups and then just different posts of when I visit a new bookstore or when I catch up with Bookstagram friends. So yeah, there's lots you can do with it, and then it's got such a lovely community, which is really the best part that's come out of it. I've met so many beautiful people from like here in Melbourne, but also even from other parts of the world when people visit or from interstate. So, and friends that I still have from the start until now. So it's been so nice. And then just having platform to be also close to authors and publishers. Yeah, it's pretty surreal being an avid reader, which I'm sure you can imagine as well. But yeah, no, it's been life changing in a really, really great way.
That sounds so beautiful. And I really admire that. Yeah, it must be conflicting at times or like, easy to feel yourself maybe wanting to get swept up in like keeping up with different trends or like going across to TikTok at some stage when that had the big boom as well. So good on you for staying really authentic to your style because I think that's one of the things that I really, really enjoy about reading your posts and your reviews is that you've got a very clear voice and it definitely doesn't seem like you're just going with like whatever new fads are popping up.
Yeah, I mean, it's so easy to be swept up by the stats, and then Instagram's so different as well. It's changed so much from yeah back in 2020 to now. Even just the algorithm, the way it shows people's posts in terms of ordering and things like that, and what sort of gets caught up and becomes viral, quote unquote, or yeah, things that sort of get buried underneath things, which is a shame because I've always enjoyed also reading other people's reviews in a similar format to mine, which is usually like a long form review, which with everyone's attention spans these days, it can be a little bit tricky to like maintain people's engagement and attention, which is why things like reels and book talks like have really blown up because it's just like a 5, 10, 20 second thing that you can kind of just swipe through. It can be a little bit discouraging when you're putting sort of a lot of effort and heart into your reviews only for it to sort of not hit the right people. But in saying that, I think generally I've got like a good group. It can be a little bit tricky, but I think as you said, if you just sort of stay true to what you love, other people can see that, and yeah, that really helps maintain the connection and the community.
Yeah, for sure. And you definitely come across like that. So yeah, you're doing
Oh,
a,
thank
a
you.
really, really great job. I wanted to ask while we're on this topic, I guess I didn't warn you about this because I've just sort of a question that's just popped into my head, but what do you think surprised you the most about this journey, like over the last 5 years?
Surprise me. That's a good question, actually. I don't have a lot of other readers in my life. I've always been sort of the book nerd, the bookworm in the group. So it always, yeah, I guess surprises is the right word. Me, how much sort of passion and love that other people have towards a hobby that's sort of been anchoring me my whole life, really. So it's always just so nice and lovely and wholesome seeing other people gush about books, rave about it, and yeah, just talk to me about the passion that I've also shared with them. That's probably one big part. And then also just as I briefly mentioned, having that access to publishers and authors, which are also people. I think it's easy to sort of forget that, and then we can sort of put writers into pedestal because we really admire their work and everything. And it's not like seeing them as a human change anything or take away from their talent, not at all. But yeah, having this sort of channel where you can connect with them and then just see how much our responses as readers also mean to them has been, yeah, a really nice, like, pleasant surprise, I guess. Yeah.
Who have you been most excited about connecting with or reaching out to you or replying to you or like seeing your stories? Is there anyone that's like
Or
really stood out, or is it just very cool when like a publishing house engages with you?
I think just in general, anyone is like, I take a lot of, like, joy and pride talking to anyone from the book world, really. But this author will probably actually talk about, because I think anyone who's been following me for a while knows I'm like pretty obsessed with her. She's also based in Australia. It's Laura McPhee Brown. So she's the author of Cherry Brown, Little Plum, and then she's also writing other novels that's about to come out. Yeah, she's been so lovely because I've just been, raving and probably annoying her about how much I love her books. So she's just been so lovely every step of the way. So from when I first read her stuff, like, yeah, back 5 years ago up until now, she's been so nice. But yeah, everyone, like all the publishing assistants and everything, have also been great. Sometimes it gets to a point where they get to know my taste, and then they would send me stuff. Like the guys at Scribe, the publishing house, are really good at that. They know I like a lot of translated fiction and everything. So yeah, which is like, again, surreal, right? Yeah, I don't even have to request specific titles. They know, like, this is something I'd like because they know the previous author's work I've already liked. But yeah, so it's probably, I don't know if this is a common knowledge. I guess anyone who is around Bookstagram would know. Generally, we get sent review ARC, so advanced review copies of a lot of titles that's about to be published. We don't get paid to write the reviews, but obviously we get the free books as a form of payment, I guess. So yeah, so that's been a big part of Bookstagram, which has been really great. Obviously, massive, massive perk having access to a lot of yeah, great books, both in Australian and also international titles.
Yeah, I can imagine that being like a very, very cool perk.
It was definitely a pinch me moment the first time I even heard about it. I was like, "What do you mean? Like, did I even care about what I have to say?" Yeah, so that was really cool. But it does get to a point that, like, you don't want a hobby like Bookstagram to become a chore or anything that you do have to draw a line somewhere. So yeah, it can be a little bit difficult to balance. But yeah, I think I've gotten to a good place now where I'm only requesting stuff I really, really want to read.
Yeah, I can only imagine. That sort of leads really well into my next question for you. How do you think that this platform has changed reading for you, or has it at all? And do you ever feel that it's taken anything away from the hobby of reading? Like the fact
Mhm.
that, you know, the pressure, I guess, to post reviews and to sort of stay active, to stay, I guess, like to stay active and sort of to keep followers and things like that. Is it that pressure ever get in the way?
It's definitely been, yeah, a journey, as you said. It's got both pros and cons, like anything really. It has changed my reading. So, I was always an avid reader, but I guess, if you kind of want to talk at numbers and quantity, I was just a lot more cash. Like, I probably read like one book a week. But now that I've channeled a lot of my energy and time towards it, I do read like a book every 2 or 3 days, which is crazy when you sort of quantify it that way, because you do get FOMO. You look at all these amazing books coming out, and then you do want to read, but then it has also introduced me to different ways of reading. So generally, I used to only read hard physical copies, and also I was a Kindle or ebook reader previously, but then now I think that's really come in handy, especially if I'm traveling or anything like that. And then one of the biggest changes as well is audiobook reading. That's what a lot of bookstagrammers do. I've noticed, and it did take some time to get into it because, yeah, especially with someone who's so used to reading words on paper, it's a very different medium. But I've gotten to a good place where now my reading's probably almost 50, which is how I can get to the amount of reading that I do now. But from Bookstagram, I've also found out like amazing platforms and resources like Libro FM, for example. They're a US based company who is like an Amazon, like Audible alternative when it comes down to audiobook reading. They also do like advanced listening copies, which again helps with new titles that maybe we want to look into as bookstagrammers. But in terms of pressure, definitely it's there, even though this is not how I make my living. I still have a full time job. There is, yeah, a certain amount of pressure and guilt, I guess, if life gets in the way. Takes so much time and effort to take the photos, write the review, engage with the community. Not that it should be a chore, but it definitely does take time and effort. So it's easy for it to get to you, I think, to the point that it can be a little bit crippling for people, to the point that they've maybe even left the platform. But for me, I think, yeah, I just have to remember that it's not it's not my day job. I'm doing this because it brings me joy, and as soon as it doesn't anymore, I don't think that there's a point in it anymore almost. And I think people understand that. Like, I don't think there's anyone out there sort of sitting around waiting for other people to like, they haven't posted a review in a week. What's going on? So, I think everyone's pretty understanding about everything else that's going on in other people's lives. So, yeah, it's as long as you kind of keep reminding yourself too, as to like the reason why it sort of brings you joy. That's the main thing.
Yeah, I think that's a really important sort of attitude to have towards it, definitely, because if it's no longer sort of, I can only imagine that like if it ever actually interfered with your love of reading and how much reading you sort of just enjoy doing at baseline, that would be, the point at which it wouldn't be sort of worth it anymore. So I feel like that's a really nice attitude towards it. I was just going to mention I'd only just found out about Libro FM as an affordable alternative where you can buy audiobooks directly from a local bookstore. So you're sort of supporting them as well.
Yeah, so in a way, it also, yeah, helps you kind of put back into the community. And I think one of the main differences as well is that you actually own the copies, whereas I think with Audible, you kind of borrow it, like as if you were going through the library channels like Libby and BorrowBox, which is another sort of like free platforms. Yeah, and they're great. So my assigned stories amplified bookstore in the CBD. They've got a new location there. They used to be just online only, and yeah, it's really nice. And then they have sales all the time. And generally, if you have like if you join through like an affiliate link or anything, there's also sort of special editions that you can have. And then if you're a bookstagrammer or a reviewer or yeah, like I guess a podcast host like yourself, there's also a form where you can request, as I said, the ALCs, the advanced listening copies, that gives you access to some of the newer titles too.
Yeah, that'd be a really cool thing to do. We've never, like, as a podcast, and obviously I've only been around for the last year or so, a couple of seasons, but I don't think it's something that the podcast has ever sort of really done or taken advantage of, I guess, like that aspect of our platform. But for example, like it only really came to mind in recent weeks when we found out that Sophie McIntosh is coming out with a new book, and we've we've obviously done an episode on her before where we read all her books and talked about it, and we're all big fans of cursed bread specifically. So we've actually been, I think we said in that episode, we just can't wait until she brings something new out. And yeah, it popped up on my feed. It's coming out, I believe, the start of next year. I actually can't remember off the top of my head, what it's called or what it's about, but I feel like her writing's only been, is already incredible, but I think we all agreed that it's sort of been getting better and better with each book. And so we're all really, really eagerly awaiting that sort of new addition to her collection of work. And that is the first time that we collectively thought it would be really cool to get our hands on a review copy so that we could sort of release a bit of a book club, like just between the three of us. Yeah, having read it. So we were sort of thinking about contacting somebody about that, but even if that doesn't come to fruition, we would definitely be reading it as soon as it's released and sort of doing an episode on it. But yeah, that's sort of the first time it's crossed our minds that maybe we could sort of reach out to a publisher as a podcast.
Yeah, I'm just looking it up now. It's about two people in love, but nobody knows it. 4 months they've been slipping away from their respective lives, sharing sweet, stolen afternoons in anonymous hotel rooms. Ooh, okay. Until one day they wake up in a bedroom and neither of them recognizes with no memory of how they got there. I'll be there for the book club. I'll follow along.
Bit of a tangent, but that just sort of came to my mind when you were mentioning the review copies. And yeah, so anyway, we're very excited for that one. You mentioned talking about Libo FM, the bookshop Amplify that you order books through Libo. What's your favorite? Obviously, we're both from Melbourne. What's your favorite bookshop? I know it's hard to pick one, maybe like top three. They don't have to be in order, don't worry.
Yeah, Amplify is definitely up there. So I don't know if you're familiar with their work. So they also started maybe also around lockdown. So it's two girls who run it, and they're both amazing. They used to be online only, and then now they've got a pop up spot, I think, which has become permanent. If I'm correct, or at least for the next few months, near Queen Vic Market, on Peel Street, I think in West Melbourne. Their biggest sort of mission, I guess, is to be a BIPOC, both owned and also stocked bookstore. So they only stock books by people of color. That's like so up my alley in terms of my reading. I generally like to prioritize writers of color. And yeah, so if you go into the store in West Melbourne, it's really like the curation's amazing. There's always so many titles that you can't really get elsewhere. So the girls are really onto it when it comes down to all the new releases. And yeah, I guess if there's anything that you're after or need, I'm sure that's something that they can look into as well. So yeah, I'm pretty sure they're the only bookstore who is specialized in that in Australia. So it's yeah, really incredible work that they're doing. They do book clubs and things like that as well and events. So that's something that you can get involved if you want to check it out in person. Other bookstores, oh my god, like I don't think you can get past paperback. I could spend like literal hours in there just looking. Like it's such a small and cozy bookstore, but again, the curation. I think it's all about curation for me. And yeah, I could just spend hours in there, like flocking between there to like Hill of Content as well, which is down the road. I don't know if that's cheating. I don't know if that's my third, but yeah. So those two, like I always love just like walking down Spring Street, grabbing something, and then going to a wine bar, grab a wine, and then read one of the books that I would have just bought. So yeah, a beautiful little pocket. But in terms of like more of the chain, I love both Avenue and Readings, just because they're in multiple locations. They're probably a little bit more convenient for me. We actually don't have a whole lot of options in the outer south, I guess is where I am, in Bayside. I feel like there's a lot of really lovely independent bookstores, like in the inner suburbs, like in the north, especially. I went to Ramona yesterday, which was also really, really good. So that's about five or six. I'm sorry, but yeah, I should probably stop there.
That is so fun. I definitely want to check out Ramona. Is it in Thornbury or?
Yes, West Garth, I think technically. Yeah, yeah, not far from Thornbury. Also really, really good. And cozy, it's got like really beautiful like maroon walls. Like it's just so warm and like inviting.
It sounds so beautiful. And actually, I saw your photos of it. It looks gorgeous, and I definitely want to check it out. I agree. It's 100% about the curation and paperback. is probably, oh, that's it's definitely my favorite in Melbourne still. I was going to mention one down your way. Have you ever been to the Grumpy Swimmer in Elwood?
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's my favorite in that Bayside. That
In South, yeah, I agree. Because that's in Elwood, between that and also the Avenue in Elstonwick. It's probably sort of like two of the closest independent ones. There's a Cook and Young in Southland. For me, that's probably the closest, which replaced the Dimmicks in there. But yeah, there's just a lot less like sort of smaller, cozier like indie bookstores down this way. But yeah,
absolutely, yeah, and we love to support sort of local sort of smaller bookstores as well, don't we? So
yeah.
it's great. We're a bit plush for choice. Yeah, honestly, I still resort to paperback because I can just jump on the tram and I do the same. I can't find
Mm,
something there, I'll go to Hill of Content. And they've just moved from their original building where they've been for ages. And they've done a really good job setting up, because that building was really iconic, the Hill of Content building itself.
yeah. And did you see how did they actually move the books? How they did the human chain? So cute.
But it was so cool, and I was so upset that I was working that day and I couldn't join in because it
Yeah.
it rained even, and they still had so many people. For those who don't know, a book chain is, I think it's been done elsewhere before, but basically they had to
I think in New York,
yeah,
maybe.
they had to
Yeah.
move the whole stock of their store, and rather than hire movers and, box everything up and then unpack it, they basically moved book by book from one shelf down the block to the shelf at their new site. And they had put a call out, I think it was only a couple of days beforehand, on their socials. And despite it being a really rainy,
Mm,
grey Melbourne day, a lot of people from all walks of life showed up, and it even started raining. And so they had to put the books inside paper bags and pass them sort of down to stop them getting wet. But, that was just such a beautiful show of the support for the Hill of Content in itself. And I know that must have felt so magical to that team. Yeah,
yeah.
the community was supporting them even though they had to leave their original site. That everyone really showed up for them.
Good news story, I
Exactly.
think that we all
That's
needed.
exactly what I was going to say. It was like a really beautiful, bookish, good news story. And I think we'll just move on because I feel like we're about 25 minutes in and we've just done our opening questions. That's all right. Sorry, Sarah, you can pick and choose. You can cut us down. Okay. So I've got Pauline on the show today because we realized we haven't done an Australian episode, an Australian writing episode, both primarily looking at Australian authors, obviously, and their sort of impact on us as readers throughout our life, and as well as perhaps like the prizes that we follow. The podcast, for one, generally follows the Stella Prize, and I've talked a few episodes about really great reading and writing festival that happens every year in Melbourne, that I've been lucky enough to attend some really wonderful free events that have been like incredible, like getting to meet Bernadine Evaristo and also Leslie Jamison as well, who's a sort of essayist, a writer from America. But yeah, so this is our Australian book episode. And I thought maybe we could start by from the start, I guess, like chatting about what Australian authors or specific books were really impactful or that you can recall and you've got fond memories of from your childhood. Were you a big reader as a child, or is it something that came to you later in life?
So that's actually a good question. And I'll probably have to let you down with like the Australian books because I was always a big reader. I taught myself reading at the age of 4, I think. I was the youngest. My siblings are a lot older than me. So they usually just play. And I was just like, I'm just going to like read these books over here in the corner. So anyway, that was in Indonesia, in Jakarta. So I actually moved here to Australia in 2018. So it's coming up. Oh, sorry, 2008, not 2018. 2008. So we're coming up to 17 years. But that means I have a pretty big gap in my like Australian reading as a child, or even just English book reading. So I read a lot of manga growing up. For Japanese manga translated to Indonesian. which was huge back home, which I think it's still pretty big now. But anyway, that was sort of my introduction to reading, and then obviously I progressed to novels, and then that was also a big part of English learning for me, for the vocabulary and grammar and everything. So that's probably one thing for me. But then I moved here, and then that's actually a good question. I used to go to the library, like the school and then the local library, just to see Jacqueline Wilson. I remember was one when I was like, 10, 11, 12. That was probably sort of my first YA introduction to English books. But yeah, I probably started focusing on Australian authors a little bit more sort of after starting Bookstagram, because that's what a lot of other Bookstagrams talk about, which has been like really great and insightful for me. That's sort of also the time where I found the literary fiction sort of genre is my go-to. Yeah, how about you? Like,
Yeah, of course. Well, totally understandable. Yeah, I didn't know that you hadn't grown up in Australia, so you're excused for not having a wealth of knowledge about Australian children's literature, and of course, not having children of your own yet as well.
yeah,
So,
yeah. So I'll learn it probably later on, but yeah, not now.
yeah, also a big reader. I can't say I taught myself to read or anything at all, but my parents read to me a lot, that and I obviously just picked reading up very quickly, and so it wasn't long before we used to keep the routine up of like my parents reading to me before bed, but then I would go afterwards and like have another book that I was reading by myself. So I was a massive, massive reader as a kid, and used to get a real kick out of like finishing a book in a day, and just like
Don't we all?
so yeah, absolutely. So as a child, I think probably like my first Australian authors of sort of novels rather than or short stories rather than sort of picture books were Maurice Gleitzman and Paul Jennings, and who so Maurice Gleitzman had quite a few sort of like funny. It was sort of like comedic writing, sort of aimed at sort of later primary school children. And so I remember
Yeah.
reading through his entire collection, most notably the Once series, which when that was published, I think I was in the end of my my primary school, sorry, era. And it's a really poignant book about the Holocaust, based on his
Mhm.
grandparents' story of being Holocaust survivors and his family history. And so I think that's, you know, I might be wrong, but I think it's what he's most sort of known for. It
Oh,
was a
okay.
series, I believe, of four
Yeah.
books in the end of this child's sort of journey through that period. And so that was really eye-opening for me, not having ever heard of the Holocaust before I read that book. And he did so skillfully. I actually have been meaning to reread the collection because I think it would go down just as well as an
Mhm.
adult. And then Paul Jennings, whose stories were the basis for the Australian show Round the Twist. Have you watched that, or did you ever hear of that?
No.
That was definitely just an Australian sort of a 90s child TV show that was on the ABC about a family who lived in a lighthouse, and they had all these weird and wonderful things happen to them, and they're based on Paul Jennings' books. So he's got a whole series of books, and they've got funny names like Unseen. What are they? Like Unreal, Unseen. I'm just bringing some up now. Let me have a quick look. I've got all of them, and I recently actually stumbled across like a collection at Op Shop, and I bought them again because I'm like, if I have more than one child, I want them to each have a collection.
That'll be so cool to read as a kid, like all the sort of, yeah, surreal, like magical elements in it. Mm.
Exactly. And it actually was, I think, probably what got me hooked into sort of spooky, sort of unsettling reads, because it
Yes.
was all sort of short stories. So you could read just one before bed. But like without a doubt, they gave me nightmares. They were, often quite sort of disturbing. For example, the one that lingers in my brain is about a boy who moves into a new house, and in his cupboard in his room, which the description of this small cupboard in the room was exactly the same as the cupboard I had in my room. It was one of those sort of on an angle, like one of those peaked roof rooms. And so there was sort of like
Yeah.
a funny little cupboard that was probably only like big enough to hang children's clothes in. I don't know what you do with it if that was like an adult room, but essentially he finds like a fox skin, like a mink something that would have worn over their shoulders. And he's, quite frightened by it. And for whatever reason, he starts feeding it the lemons from a tree outside his bed, like a window in his room. There's a lemon tree in their yard, and every night he puts a lemon in the fox's mouth because the fox's mouth is sort of taxidermied open. And he notices that the fox starts filling up, like it's suddenly, instead of its tail being flat, its tail is sort of plump. And basically, gradually, the fox turns back
Oh,
into a fox. And one night he opens it, and the fox runs and jumps out the window. And it turns out that his, grandfather or whoever had lived in the house before had killed a fox and planted it under the lemon tree. And so essentially, bit by bit, it was it was feeding the fox back its body so that it could then like escape.
I can see how you can then would transition into, yeah, the more like horror-esque
Yes,
books now
definitely.
as an adult.
I loved like getting a little bit spooked by those stories, but that one's like has really stayed with me. Other sort of notable books that I just came
Okay.
straight to mind when I was thinking about this was one book called February Dragon by Colin Thiel, and it's about a family living through a disastrous bushfire event. And again, that was quite sort of a eye-opening and, a little bit traumatic book to read as a young child. And I did read quite ahead,
Mm.
like for my age. So I was probably quite young when I read it, and that has really stuck with me. I think about it. I think about it a lot still.
Because it's such a formative year of our reading as well. So yeah, if there's anything that is really impactful, and especially if it's Australian, like you can just picture it sort of happening in your own backyard. And then they're like massive events like a bushfire. Yeah, I can see how that would stuck with you.
And as a city kid, we didn't have family in the country, so I had no
Mm.
idea really. I don't think about bushfires or really what they did to communities and how terrifying it was for families who live and rely on, the land for their income and their livelihood and, whole families and whole communities that are just destroyed by bushfires. But that book has really stuck with me, as well as one that I actually found. So Pauline and I got a coffee on the weekend and we ended up at a school fete. Shout out to Fitzroy North Primary School. They had
Yeah.
the most incredible book book stall, I guess. It was like one whole children's classroom full of books, and one half of the room was children's books, but the other half were adult books. And obviously, the parents, I'm not sure if they had like some parents who own bookshops or something that they were donating these books, but it was just an incredible array of it.
Oh, they're all just like well-read parents. It was amazing.
Exactly, and very generous to donate these brilliant books. It was basically filled with prize winners and Australian fiction, and I lost it a little bit. I think Pauline had a lot of self-control and, like, came away with maybe four books.
You said that, but yes, yes, it still wasn't nothing. And then I feel like we grabbed everything in the first like 5 minutes or something.
Oh,
Like it was a pretty small
we
room.
we were in there in and out in, like, 15 minutes, and I had to cut myself off because I physically couldn't hold any more books, and then I said that, and I went and paid for my books, and then we walked out, and we found the boxes of free books, and I picked up another 4 books, like, and one of them was Playing Betty Bow, which is a book by Ruth Park. It was this one. I don't know if you saw me pick it up, Pauline, but essentially, this is one that I
Oh,
read
yeah.
as a child, and it's just really stayed with me as well. It was written in 1980, and it follows a teenager who accidentally time travels back to 1870 Sydney. So, like the exact place she's in at the time, but 1870,
Oh,
while she's playing like a mysterious sort of neighborhood game. And
yeah.
essentially, she's stuck there and she has to try and find her way home. And it is Ruth Park, sorry, is a very, very well-known Australian author. And I believe she wrote a lot of adult fiction. I've got one of her books that I'm yet to read called The Harps in the South. Let me double check that I'm talking about the same author because I remember Yes, it is Ruth Park. So the Harp in the South is one of her most popular adult fiction books. I've picked it up. It's on my bookshelf. I really need to read it, but so playing Betty Bow was definitely a bit of a formative book for me as well. And as a teenager, I devoured all of Tim Winton's collection.
Mm. I don't think I've actually read a single Tim Winton, which I know is like a crime. I know where to start. Yeah, I just get sometimes I get overwhelmed.
So he's so well known, both for his just like beautiful character building, but for his description of the Australian natural world. He grew up in Western Australia, and so a lot of his writing is sort of focused in coastal towns. That's a really good place to start is with Breath, because I think that is it remains my favorite. Another one that surprised me that I actually hadn't read as a teenager, I'd never been able to get my hands on it, was a novel called The Riders by Tim Winton. And it's a rare one that's actually not set in Australia. It's set in Ireland, but it's about an Australian man who goes to sort of set up a new life for himself and his family in the UK or somewhere in Europe, I think. So, that's also that.
I've only
Yeah.
just started reading the first, so it's his latest novel, Christos Tsiolkas. How do you pronounce his last name? Haven't read The Slut or seen it. But his latest, The In-Betweeners, was actually really good. So it's good to get a taste here and there of like the latest stuff so that I can sort of go back to the earlier works. I lied to you. I did read Tim Winton. I read Juice earlier. Was it this year or yeah, maybe earlier this year? And I was not a fan.
Okay, that I've got to be honest, I haven't read that one, and I'm not up to date with his most recent stuff.
Yeah, it's a climate fiction, and I feel like something about who I am as a reader now that I found out after trying quite a few titles, that I'm not actually that big on climate fiction, which is a shame because there's some really great, Australian writers who usually do focus on sort of the climate and the landscape side of things, which I think is usually done really beautifully, but it's just not necessarily like a topic that I'm usually drawn to.
Yeah, it makes sense for him, really makes sense for him, I think, as a writer to go in that direction because the natural beauty of Australia is something that is obviously, so important in his life and to his sort of development, both as a young boy growing up into a man. He still lives in Australia and of course he's still writing, but seeing the threat to the thing he loves most would make sense for him to pivot into writing climate fiction. But I agree. I also it's not a subject that really grips me. But that being said, I probably haven't given it enough of a go. I think um, it's almost like the way I feel about reading pandemic books. That it's not that it's
Mm.
you know, I think it's just a bit too close to home. And I guess, so I think the climate fiction, whilst I know this is exactly what it's trying to elicit, is like a fear and a discomfort and a warning. It is just like, I find it very scary because, I am so frightened about that being exactly what the future looks like
Mm.
and what we can do about it. And I surround myself with, people who really care about the environment and we do a lot to try and minimize our impact. But it is still very scary as, just individual people knowing that those, big organizations and big companies are really the ones, who are ruining it for us all. But no. Yeah, I think it's probably just on brand for me because I'm not a big, like big utopian fiction reader or like, I don't like the futuristic theme. Being said though, like I've definitely read some and they've surprised me and, like again, I think I should be not too quick to sort of pass off whole genres.
Like speculative sort of fiction. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
Sometimes we read a couple though, and it's so easy to just dismiss the whole sort of subgenre or anything. Emily St. John Mandel, obviously not Australian, but she writes amazing speculative fiction. If you have read Station 11 and yeah, all of her other stuff.
I have that's and that and I Who Have Never Known Men as well. Yeah, ones that definitely changed my mind or my opinion about that genre. But yeah, it's not something I reach for. I agree with you. What would be your favorite Australian novel or your Australian favorite Australian author? Do you have one?
Yeah. Well, when I was prepping for this pod, and then you obviously mentioned the questions, I was like getting nervous sweats because there's just so, there's so many great books and great authors. Yeah, so it's always so hard. Thinking of, just one or two favorites. But yes, obviously I mentioned Laura McPhee Brown, Cherry Beach. I think I've reread it like 3 times. I just love it so much. So I'm super excited for a new novel that's coming out. A Little Plum was also gorgeous. It's sort of a story about motherhood and sort of going through psychosis around that time, which can make for obviously an intense read. So, a bit of a trigger warning there, but it's just written so beautifully. So, yeah, as I said, I think the sort of literary fiction is the area that I'd sort of go towards, which is usually to do with the writing. So I think I like really quiet, atmospheric, character-driven writing, which I think a lot of the titles that I think about have that in common. And then the other one that I remember really vividly about loving, which was also maybe about 5 years ago, 4 years ago in lockdown, was Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason. So I think she was born in New Zealand. Um, I think she's living in Sydney now, but she lived a lot of her life in London, and I don't know if you've read that Sorry and Bliss, but beautiful book that also touches on motherhood, mental illness. So yeah, when I was sort of going through my list, I was like, there's actually quite a lot of common themes and overlaps in a lot of these books, which I guess makes sense that you can sometimes people do, and these characters do process their trauma and grief in a way that could be sort of read as poetic, but obviously also, really harrowing and traumatic as well. So yeah, Cherry Beach and Sorrow and Bliss are the two sort of recent-ish favorites.
Speaking about Meg Mason, I really, really enjoyed You Be Mother, which is again fiction about sort of mothers during the early years of having children. But I started off sort of my introduction to Meg Mason was her memoir, which is Say It Again in a Nice Voice. And so I went from Say It Again in a Nice Voice, and then I read You Be Mother, and it was really interesting just because I got the direct contrast of how much of her life she'd put into You Be Mother, and how many, because I was sort
Yes.
of reading about the same events, just one with a fictionalized character, but obviously really sort of standout events
Mm,
in her in the period of her life where she had like a very young child, and she'd just moved. I think she'd just moved to London.
yeah,
Yeah, time just potentially before or just after having a baby, and how she sort of just navigated the loneliness of that, and how she sort of established a community, and what that looked like for her, including all the sort of the difficult bits that people are less, I guess, a bit more reluctant to share. So it was just a very honest portrayal, and I'm a real sucker for a memoir about either deciding to have children or not, or what it's like to have children. I think it's like the stage of life I'm in, as well as what I do for my
yeah.
job. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Meg Mason as well.
Yeah, no, she's great. But yeah, definitely please read Soren Bliss. You would have had the taste of her writing, obviously, out of the other two. But I think I haven't read the other two, but I've had a lot of people talk about it. And from what I could see, it feels like Soren Bliss is sort of a more mature stage of her writing. She's probably like a little bit more assured in that novel versus the other two, because obviously that was specific to a certain life stage.
I think Sorrow and Bliss is her most recent work. It was published in 2020, so that makes sense. Whereas The Mother was published in 2017, so that sort of natural development and maturing as a woman and as a writer.
Yes.
Yeah. Are there any other books or authors that sort of stand out to you?
The other one, I set myself a top three, so maybe I'll just very, very quickly touch on A Language of Limbs by Dylan Hardcastle. Have you read it? It's got a beautiful like orange cover with like a couple of bodies on the cover. So um beautiful, again, highly recommend. A lot of, I don't think I've seen a bad review about it, on it, which, for a good reason. When it was released, like, I don't know how long ago now, maybe not too long, less than 2 years, about 2 years ago. Sorry, it is a story about two queer people who grew up differently in the 80s. So there is a bit of a nostalgia sort of feeling around the 80s and then the AIDS epidemic as well at the time. But then also the story is told in two parts as Limb 1 and Limb 2. So one of them, I can't really remember which is which, but sort of one lives their life authentically as a queer person, being involved in the queer community, surrounding themselves with, the people who are going through sort of similar things to them, which is obviously not easy at the time. And just a lot of hardships and trauma and everything. A lot of sort of political unrest as well around, queerness, and that person sort of focuses on that life, and then the other person kind of suppresses those feelings and then try to sort of live the quote unquote normal life. So the contrast between the two was actually, really interesting to read side by side. But then beautiful, beautiful poetic writing. So yeah, 'cause I think I appreciate that sort of lyrical style of writing. It can be a bit of a fine balance because if it can feel overwritten sometimes when things are a little bit like the prose is a bit too poetic. But I reckon these three books like really hit the note for that sort of literary fiction writing.
This one's been on my TBR for like quite a long time. So thank you for the reminder. I definitely need to sort of bump that up the list and read that one soon. I have, I guess, I think when I was preparing for this episode, I was like, oh, I don't feel like I read enough Australian fiction, Australian
Mhm.
non-fiction. But then when I looked around my bookcases and my piles of books everywhere, I realized that I probably do read a little bit more than I think. One big standout, and the Bookcast Club before I joined did a book club on Tara June Winch's The Yield. That was another. That's definitely one of my favorites as well. There's another one that was actually when I was a patron of the Bookcast Club, one of my book in the mail picks from the lovely hosts was Bodies of Light by Jennifer Down.
Oh my god. Sorry, I literally had that. I had the top three, but underneath I had Bodies of Light, and I was like, "Oh, I've hit my limit." I should have just mentioned it, and that one would have been incredible. So good, and that's sort of like one person living a life sort of with a mysterious past, and that sort of coming after them. Yeah, I find those sort of storylines quite intriguing. But her writing is incredible.
I really have an issue keeping the title of it in my mind. But yes, absolutely beautiful, gut wrenching. I think the really beautiful thing about reading Australian literature is you can just tell when it's written about Australians. Like it's often the similar sort of characters come up,
Mhm.
which are just dialogue, the environment and the descriptions of nature, which are really unique to Australia, as well as just the attitude of people, and they'll often just be characters that just really emblematic of, the sort of like the way that the resilience of Australians, in particular
Yes.
particularly when you are reading about people who live rurally and who live off the land and who rely on the natural resources for their livelihood and people who care for the land as well. It's something that I have tried to focus more on is reading First Nations authors. So Too Much Lip by Melissa Lukashenko she's a fantastic author.
Yes. And there's been so many great titles coming out. I know there's quite a few on the Stella Prize. I know you've briefly mentioned the Stella Prize, which I haven't read. I haven't read Black Convicts or Black Witness. Maxine Beneba Clark as well is a great First Nations writer who writes. I think she writes in both fiction and non-fiction.
Some other Australian authors, Alexis Wright. I don't know if you heard the saga, but I got really stuck about halfway through and it threw me into a reading slump when Sarah and I were reading the Stella Prize last year. I just had to come to terms myself with, the reason that I was finding it difficult and uncomfortable to read were sort of my sort of Western ideas about how storylines, should sort of progress, and felt that I learnt a lot from her writing, and it's something that I can recognize as being so powerful, so important, so beautiful. I think she's an absolute genius, and I really, really strongly feel that, and I really respect her as an author. But yes, I do need to finish reading Praiseworthy and read her other novels as well. But yeah, there's just such a plentiful supply of really, really brilliant Australian authors, both in the past and in the present. We're very, very, very spoilt for choice in this country. And it means a lot to me, like reading Australian fiction and supporting Australian authors and Australian book prizes and festivals. We have, I think, even, more untapped resources in terms of emerging writers as well. I wanted to mention a bit of like an under the radar fiction pick that I'm reading at the moment is a novel called The Hallows, which is by an author called Foster Burton. And it's actually a self-published book. He published it self-published in collaboration with a really beautiful printing press in Sydney. And I came across him on social media, which is where he does a lot of his sort of advertising. And I ordered a copy and I'm halfway through and I absolutely love it. I don't actually believe it's stocked in bookshops. He's the sole sort of distributor. And it comes with a beautiful like bookmark with a handwritten note by him. Book itself, like the printing is just gorgeous. There's sort of gold leaf on the cover. And it's a novel set in the gold rush era in Queensland, sort of about a squatter, a family who was squatting on land. There's sort of two brothers and a friend, and then their wives and children to be living on this land and squatting, and they find gold. So they find a really large gold nugget whilst they're working the field. And they basically greed and sort of gold fever leads to a series of very unfortunate events. It is a really gripping writing, well-established and believable characters, a really good look into that time in history in our country without feeling like you're reading dry historical fiction. And like I said, he's a self-published author. This book's had a lot of success despite not being very like widely heard of. But it is absolutely his work is just beautiful, and he's actually got a sequel coming out early next year, and I'm really looking forward to reading that as well. Just maybe one quickly, do you have any Australian book on your TBR that you're looking forward to reading?
The one that's kind of on my immediate TBR at the moment is Chosen Family by Madeline Gray. I try not to delve into the blurb sort of too much before reading, but I know it's sort of a story about friendship. It's got a really gorgeous, colorful cover. I don't know if you've seen it in bookstores just yet. It's so pretty. But she's also the author of Green Dots, which I enjoyed when I read it a little while ago. The publisher sent me the box, which was really cute with like the matching socks. I'm really looking forward to it. I've heard great things about it already. I've read a lot of that's a little bit more about coming of age, maybe a few years back, but not so much recently. So I think that'll be really good to read now.
I think Chosen Family only came out last week.
Yeah, very, very recently. I think the launch was a couple of weeks ago. So yeah.
And obviously much anticipated after this the success of Green Dot, which I believe was published last year. One that's on my TBR, just for a bit of variety, actually, a non-fiction Australian book. Actually, a very, very important Australian writer that we've not mentioned is Helen Garner, and she has a book that's just been published. It's non-fiction. It's called The Mushroom Tapes, and it's conversations between Helen Garner, Chloe Hooper, and
Krasnostein?
Sarah Krasnostein. Did you say?
Yeah, an incredible, like, nonfiction writer. So, yeah, such a strong lineup of writers in that book.
So the book is The Mushroom Tapes, and it is basically a book about Erin Patterson. For those who aren't aware, been a big story in the last really 18 months in Australia about a lady who poisoned her family with death cap mushrooms. And the trial garnered a lot of attention in Australia. There were a lot of sort of podcasts. Everyone was very fixated on it in the media. And so this book is called The Mushroom Tapes, and it's basically sums up sort of the events of that trial and all the conversation about this, what ended up being a triple murder, through the eyes of Helen Garner, Chloe Hooper, and Sarah Krasnostein. So that's just hit bookshops this week,
Mhm.
and I'm really looking forward to picking that one up and reading it.
It was actually incredible to me, the turnaround time. Obviously, they've been working through in the background as the trial has gone on the last couple of years. But yeah, that'd be really interesting. I think I'm gonna keep an eye out for the audiobook.
I think it would probably make an amazing audio book, just listening to, their thoughts and opinions about the trial. And it's not a very big book. And of course, if you've got three prolific writers together, it probably would take them only a short amount of time to put together something, truly incredible. So I'm really, really looking forward to that. And it's already had really good reviews. So yeah, feel very, very lucky to have had our paths cross, and I'm looking forward to sort of staying in touch. And we'd love for you to join us again in the future. Yeah, we love what you do, and thank you for supporting the podcast as well. We're obviously, not a really big podcast, but we love what we do, and we love connecting with people all around the world through our love of books. So it's really special.
No, you guys are doing amazing work. I don't know what I'd do without book podcasts. Yeah, it'll be very boring otherwise, I think. I just love hearing other people chat about books and how much they love reading as well. So it's nice.
Thank you so much, Pauline, for joining me and chatting about Australian literature. Once again, so Pauline just does, incredible work in the Bookstagram sort of world. She's, one of my favorite people to follow, and we really love reading your reviews. We're a big fan of you, Pauline, on this podcast.
Oh,
You can find Pauline at paulineisreading on Instagram, and yeah, give her a follow and see why we love her so much.
oh, thanks so much, Belle, and thanks for the girls, for everyone from the Bookcast team. But yeah, no, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
No worries at all, and the pleasure's been all ours. Okay, bye, Pauline.
Bye.